Hi there, I'm Jean-Pierre Ruth for Information Week, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Lisa Costa, who has been part of getting things rolling at the United States Space Force as their very first Chief Technology and Innovation Officer. And since those days, she has definitely been part of seeing and understanding and having perspectives on how technology in a lot of different fashions are being applied, and some concerns that might pique the interest of CTOs, CIOs across the industry and from the public and private sector as well. So, Dr. Costa, appreciate you making the time. Thank you so much for being available today.
Thank you so much, JP. I appreciate it.
So, Dr. Costa, I saw one of your speeches that you gave, I believe it might have been last year, where you talked about the early beginnings with space, with your time with Space Force. The idea that at the time you were facing limited capacity, but we're not limited on ideas. How do you really approach, or how did you really approach building up your plans as a Chief Technology Officer, Innovation Officer in such a scenario?
That's a great question. I was at Special Operations Command when we first stood it up, and it was not unlike standing up Space Force, right? You've got a lot of ideas, but you have very few resources, and you are really outnumbered by all of the other services. So you have this challenge of trying to make progress while also trying to meet the daily demands of the Pentagon. So the focus really, from my perspective, was on warfighting in space, right? We were kind of prohibited from using that language too much in the early days of Space Force, but it's really the only reason that Space Force exists, is to perform warfighting in space, to defend U.S. assets in space, and to ensure that space is available to everyone who needs it. So focusing on the capabilities that would help us leap ahead from 25 to 35-year-old technology, networks in particular, but also AI and what I would call the supercoder program, which was getting individuals who were already experts on a weapons platform in space, knowledgeable about coding, and then being able to use that talent directly in mission environments and make changes on the fly. Those were some of the top priorities for me.
Gotcha. Thank you for that input on that. Getting everyone up to speed in such a circumstance, like, what kind of elements do you really need to draw on? Like what, and if it can relate it to, somebody who's more in the public sector, a CTO, like who might be, maybe they're new into their role, or their organization is going through some kind of change where they kind of have to have that kind of like ground up approach. What were some lessons learned that helped make this come together for you?
Right. Now, I find some of the exact same challenges. I won't call them problems, because I really view them as opportunities, right, in the private equity and the venture capital space. So imagine a private equity situation where several companies have been split up, and then some of the pieces and parts have been brought together. And you're trying to develop a strategic message for that company that's now formed, that probably has a name that no one knows about, right? So Space Force, you would get, is that a real thing? Or what's it like working for Elon Musk? Literally, I would get that question. So this happens all the time in industry, right? Where it's, look, we don't know the name, but we've been in business for 40 years, right? But just under another name. And trying to get people speaking the same language. And that was very similar to the challenges in Space Force, where we had what are called inter-service transfers, right? From the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps into the Space Force, and really didn't have a space background. So one of the very first things we did was we created everything you needed to know about space, so that when someone joined, didn't matter if they were civilian or military, they took this class, and it was the basis of how you would communicate inside of Space Force, so that we were not using different language to describe the same things, or the same language to describe different things. I think that's really important. Education and continuous education is important, regardless of whether you're in industry or in government.
Gotcha. And you retired from that role at Space Force about a year or so ago?
Not quite a year ago, but almost.
Mhm.
I was going to do nothing for 6 months, but I have really failed in retirement. Well, so as someone who is an AI and a cyber and a space expert, I find myself very busy these days, as you can imagine. But I view it as a real opportunity. I love the energy that is going on in those areas. I love the amount of money, the emphasis going into AI, space, and cyber, and I think we're really at an inflection point, right? We're at an inflection point where, and I get asked a lot, when do I think Gen AI, right, is going to become a real thing? And my point is, well, I think agentic AI is a real thing. It's maturing. It's that's the infancy stage now. But if you can give very complex tasks to AI, and you can trust the AI, and you can trust but verify the AI, are you not at Gen AI? If it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, is it not a duck? If the challenge is it has to be sentient, then I think we're far away from that. If the challenge is AI can be given a end state, a desired end state, and in the military we call that the commander's intent, and then it works out all of the logic and the reasoning, then I think we're at a Gen AI state.
Gotcha. And you've also been, from what I understand, giving some advisement in regards to perspectives on AI resources that are developed overseas, and kind of like the we call the balance of like trust, or trusting and verifying. What are some of the perspectives and thoughts that you've been kind of putting out there, or at least offering to folks when they're considering things like DeepSeek or other resources, and looking at it from I guess from the security perspective, from a trust perspective, what are some of the thoughts that you've kind of gone back and forth with there?
So, absolutely. So trust is absolutely critical. You would not give your credentials, passwords, credit cards, and digital signature to an untrusted source, right? On the street, someone asked you for that information.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the equivalency of using some of these unproven and questionable platforms. So, with DeepSeek, I like to say, don't trust a black box from a gray zone, right? Because that's the equivalency of giving all of your intellectual property, your personal information, and your organization, whether it's a corporation or a nation state, providing that to another nation state for their advantage. It's one of the reasons I love working with Seeker, right? It's repeatable, it's trustworthy. There are no hidden black boxes. I understand as a user of the system the weights that are being placed on the elements of the models being used. And Seeker uses many different models, right? Ensemble modeling to allow me to execute a number of very complex tasks, right? To get to agentized AI. So when you're thinking about putting information in to a system, be careful of what that system is collecting. And you cannot always trust what people are saying. There is a great test that a CISO did, and it's on YouTube, showing that he connected a network sniffer onto his network. He uploaded DeepSeek, and he's asking, are you sending any packets back to mainland China? No, I'm not sending any packets back to mainland China. And all of these packets, you can look on the network sniffer, all of this information being extracted from his system. And actually in the early days of DeepSeek, non-encrypted. So just completely an open system. So yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like the ignore the man behind the curtain. As we're
Exactly.
the idea of innovation, just kind of in some instances, kind of racing ahead the security side of things, be it in the public or private space, is not the base level idea is not new. There's always that desire to push it, like, here, let's try this shiny new tech or shiny new innovation. But are things different with what we're seeing with AI in the instances we're seeing now, in terms of, like, is it still the kind of the same kind of argument and tug of war, or there's differences because of the pressures that we're seeing now? We're constantly seeing folks talking about, if you're not doing this, your organization is going to be left behind. So just dive in, dive into the water. Don't worry about how shallow or deep it's going to be, or if that even is water, and if it might be some deep fake water, it's actually just concrete. What is different?
That's great. Yeah. So what I would say is, I always start with, what's the problem, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Not, I've got AI, or I've got, and then fill in the blank, right? And then how can I use that? So what's the problem I'm trying to solve? AI may not be the answer. I will say, though, that AI is the answer to a number of different things. Now, one of the challenges, I think, is that senior leaders tend to think of AI as only large language models, right? ChatGPT or Llama or whatever. That is not the only AI, right? It is a form of AI. And AI takes many different, has many different branches. And so I think the real challenge is education about what AI is, what AI can do for you, and what the different types of AI are. I think we have abstracted that a little bit by the use of LLMs, and perhaps maybe even the overuse of LLMs, because we tend to see, at least I do, a lack of creativity in the responses, because it's really kind of rehashing what others have said. And so you kind of worry about this challenge, or this concern about, in a couple of years, will everything on the internet be this recursion of, LLM generated textual information? So that's why it's so incredibly important to combine the human with the technology so that, well, yeah, it's going to put out a draft, but I'm going to put my own thoughts and my own creativity into this. And that's going to drive even more uh, uh, better responses from the AI. And not only for me, but for others. That's why you have to be careful, right? Um, Organizations that are highly regulated, so banks, any financial institution, hospitals, the government needs to be careful about what they're putting into a commercial LLM because it can provide information about either the models that you use to either approve or not approve a certain medical treatment, or how government agencies decide to weight factors when they're choosing a contract. So having AI capabilities that can train on your own data without, providing insight to others about your data is really important. And Seeker does that. And I like that because one of the biggest challenges I had, and I will guarantee you that every CIO on this channel has had the challenge of employees putting things in to ChatGPT that they should not be putting into ChatGPT. So you want them to learn, you want them to experiment, but you want them to do that safely from a cyber perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. Putting things in Chat GPT, making use of AI and other technology that has not been cleared by the organization because they probably felt like, well, it seemed fine when I used it at home or I heard it was okay. Definitely is one of those. We're in a very different cyber frontier these days. Do you have any particular lessons that you learned or guidance that you can offer for those who are there maybe stepping into their first time as into technology leadership at their organization, or maybe even yeah, stepping into a new or new to them organization, stepping in and having to take charge as their CTO, Chief Innovation Officer? What are some of the principles that you've held on to, or at least even new ones that you've kind of learned or looked to based on where we are these days?
Oh, wow, there are so many. And I've had the benefit of just learning from the teams that I've been a member of, right, over the years. And so, um, I think one of the key parts is we all go into a situation based upon the role that we're playing, right? And so if we're a CTO, we're all about, we're just going to open up the aperture and we're going to do everything. And it's not all CTOs, but as a CTO, that's what you kind of want to do. You want people to think outside the box. In fact, you sometimes want them to not even know where the box is. And so, but just realize and have empathy for the people who are playing their parts, right? So like the CIO, who wants to only have one, right? I only want one AI solution. That's probably not going to be sufficient. Uh, People learn differently. People are attracted to different tools because of the way they learn and how they think about problems. So it's really important to meet your users where they're at, and not try to limit too much. In fact, where I would say you should really focus on is making sure that your data, and not only your data, but increasingly so your algorithms or your prompts are not locked down into AI or, other technologies. So, we used to have a problem where it was about data and it got locked in and you couldn't get your data out. And, otherwise it was going to take you 2 years to reprocess it, et cetera. But I'm starting to see that same model being used with locking down algorithms. I think it's important to have open systems and maybe allow your people to use multiple systems and expose them to multiple systems, because you're going to get the best performance out of them, because it's the way they think about problems. And I think it's incredibly important to have multidisciplinary people on your team who can help advise you on that as well.
Gotcha. A two-part question to close us out. What keeps you up at night in terms of the technology landscape and how things are being deployed, how things are being exploited as well? And what gives you hope?
What keeps me up at night? What keeps me up at night is this attitude that, hey, look, Google and Facebook and Instagram and all of these systems take my data. So why should I care that TikTok and DeepSeek and other, tools are collecting that data? Well, because while, yes, people are collecting your data, they're not necessarily planning to use that data to subjugate you, right? They want to deliver an ad. So I see that as being, while annoying, benign. So it keeps me up at night that individuals would be so naive that we are not already at war with nation state peers. And we need to do everything that we need to do as citizenry to make sure that we and our leadership are safe. The thing that gives me hope is the incredible talent that we have in this nation. And to see the private equity and venture capital community coming together for dual use purposes of government and industry needs. So the same sorts of solutions that are being used for discovering new health systems, new treatments, new biological cures are the same systems being used to identify bad people, right? Or illicit financial transactions. And being able to use those systems in multiple ways gives me a lot of hope. So that's, I could probably give you a much longer list, but I think that we are certainly blessed as a nation to have the young people that we have who are incredibly curious. They're driven by new capabilities, new ways of thinking, right, about business, and they're very entrepreneurial. They don't want to work for other people. They want to develop their own companies, and I think that's great. I really think that is our strength as a nation.
Well, here's to elements of hope further flourishing in the time in the future ahead. Dr. Costa, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for making yourself available.
JP, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.